This is BlackJupiter, I'm Agent Random, and that's Shiki Misaki. She's from a game called The World Ends With You, which you might have heard of if you've ever heard me speak on this place called the internet. You also might remember that I made a 20-second video roasting her about a year ago. This is that, but instead of 20 seconds, it's insert runtime here. Shiki was a main character in the original game, but very quickly got pushed further and further into the background as the series went on. Hence her title as Square's rejected character. This video will contain spoilers for the entire World Ends With You series, but if you want to spite me and just not play them anyway, I'll be recapping everything that you would need to know. Also some spoilers for Kingdom Hearts, I guess, too. Shiki's debut was at the start of the first game. She's one of the first characters that lead character Neku meets after dying and entering the Reaper's game, a competitive game where winning returns you to life. The World Ends With You structure has Neku spend each third of the story with a different partner, and Shiki is the first one. The game's core narrative focus is to tell Neku's journey from
out of my face
to
I'm glad I met you guys.
And each stage of this is facilitated by each of his three partners. But a secondary focus of the narrative is to develop each of these characters, since it would be super awkward to spend a week straight hanging out with one person and not get to know them, like, at all. I hope that helps us understand what Shiki's role in the narrative is when she inserts herself into Neku's life at the start. Let's focus on how she affects Neku first. Shiki is an incredibly outgoing and kind person, almost to an extreme. This creates a really fun juxtaposition because Neku is very much the opposite. But Shiki has the effect of getting Neku to learn that he should maybe try to open up to others. She calls him out when he's being a little too Neku and manages to loosen those headphones on his head just a little bit. But this video isn't about Neku. If you want an exploration of his character journey, play the dang game. I just want to give some basic context about him so that you can be aware of how integral Shiki is to the game's main story. So let's talk about what makes Shiki herself so great. When entering the Reaper's game, she was subjugated to something called an entry fee, which for the sake of this video, I'm going to define as she got inflicted with something that will mega screw with her. In Shiki's case, this was a change in her appearance. Backstory time. Shiki doesn't actually look like this, she looks like this. But at the start of the game's story, she obtains the appearance of her best friend, Eri. Shiki is someone that felt inferior to her best friend. She envied and idolized everything about her.
Eri has all the things I don't. Looks, brains, design sense, lots of friends. I envied her. And now that I'm inside her body, it just hurts even more.
I think that this is something that most, if not all of us, can relate to on some level. We all have aspects of our lives where we have that feeling of inferiority. We may look at people next to us and wonder, why can't I just be like them? And for some, that might even manifest to the level of Shiki, where she becomes consumed by that envy. Until she gets what she wants. She wakes up one day in Eri's body, and this provides the fascinating situation where we see exactly how Shiki views Eri. That being an unrealistically outgoing and happy person. That facade that she creates only cracks when this persona isn't well received by Neku. Whenever that happens, Shiki looks at a picture of Eri on her phone and asks herself what she's doing wrong. How could anyone not like Eri? She's perfect, isn't she? What value is there in Shiki? This even gets to the point where Shiki realizes that she has no actual reason to win the game. She doesn't want to live if she's just going to become herself again. No one wants that, and Shiki herself definitely doesn't want that. This builds until the 6th chapter of the game where Neku learns the truth about her, and Shiki also learns the truth about herself. Because in a chance event, she gets to overhear Eri talking about her. She learns that Eri feels empty without Shiki. Before the events of the game, Shiki and Eri both had dreams of becoming fashion designers. They're just really into clothes. Eri designed and Shiki sewed. She even sewed the stuffed animal that she carries around, Mr. Mew. But Eri was ready to quit on those dreams because in her eyes, Shiki was what was holding it all together. Without the half of the dream team, Eri's dream would not happen. This opens Shiki's eyes. Just like Eri was so essential to her life, she was essential to Eri's. For the first time, she realized just how valuable she was. Eri wasn't some perfect, flawless being like she imagined. She was human, and it was okay for Shiki to be that too, as long as she did it as Shiki. It's all a very moving moment. Seeing this and accepting herself is what drives Shiki to become determined to win the Reaper's game. Her final major character beat is when she's just won the Reaper's game. She's still unsure about what's about to happen. She asks Neku if they'll still be friends once he sees the real her. This shows that her growth didn't necessarily happen overnight, but she has finally begun the journey towards that growth. Oh, and of course, Neku's all like, heck yeah, you'll always be my girlfriend, before he goes to hang out with his boyfriend for the next third of the game. At the end of the story, we reunite with Shiki finally in her true form, but her eyes are always just barely cut out of view. I think that this was to show that it really didn't matter what Shiki's real appearance was, because Shiki is who she is on the inside, or whatever. I'm not really sure that I entirely agree with the sentiment, but hey, whatever. There's a lot of other stuff going on at the end of the game anyway, so it's not really something I'm thinking about. However, the original game had one small issue with this narrative decision, and its name was Another Day. Another Day was a bonus chapter available taking place in a non-canon world. Problem is, no usable sprites existed for Shiki's true form, so instead they opted to give her Aries sprites just like she had for most of the main story. Most people would just not bat an eye at it, but if you happen to immediately book it for Utagawa as soon as the day begins, you'll run into Joshua, who totally unprompted will turn to Neku and tell him how our perceptions of reality shape how we see the world. So, if you're wondering why a certain young lady still looks like somebody else, it's because you refuse to perceive her as she really is. The only thing stopping you from seeing what she really looks like is you. So you see, it's your fault. When you're drowning in a sea of work with not enough time, why pour your soul into assets that get used all of once? Really, have some compassion. Ta-ta. And I'm not gonna lie, that's a really hilarious reason to justify why she looks like this. That said, the devs did have time to make sprites of themselves to be used primarily in this day, so whatever, it was funny, so it gets a pass in my book. As for Shiki's characterization in this day, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Another Day is just one big joke, so everyone gets kinda turned into a meme. Not that Shiki even knows what that is. Oh, and except for Joshua, he's still totally just Joshua. But plot twist, kid! The World Ends With You didn't end with just one game. The next new major piece of story content was Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, which incorporated the World Ends With You cast. Whoa, look, an older video! In that video, I pointed out how Dream Drop was very careful to incorporate each World Ends With You's character's storyline into the plot of the levels that they appear in. Shiki just so happens to be the World Ends With You character whose name I mentioned the least number of times in that video because she's the exception. Shiki's one major character beat is copy and pasted from Neku, where she makes friendly with someone just to bring them to a very clearly evil dude. That is, not in character for her at all. Neku? Definitely. He does basically exactly that in his own game, but not Shiki. I get the vibe playing this game that the writers just had no idea what to do with her, but they knew they had to include her anyway because she's on the World Ends With You's box. And what's wild is that they had the easiest way to incorporate her character right in front of them. She spends her first appearance in Dream Drop teaming with Kingdom Hearts character Riku. Riku is a character who became so consumed by looking up to someone that he lost himself and even took that person's appearance once. Gee, now doesn't that sound familiar? They could have had a little heart-to-heart moment where Riku's all like,
being back in this town and looking like this, it reminds me of when I lost my heart.
Lost your heart? Gosh, that sounds awful.
I looked up to someone too much. Someone whose heart was made of darkness.
That person really seems like bad news. That sure makes me glad that I have good friends to look up to.
That's good, Shiki. It was a really tough experience. That darkness consumed me, even made me lose my real appearance for months.
Months?
But maybe if I finish my mission here, I'll finally be free and reach dawn.
Riku, don't ever lose who you are. There's nothing in the world more valuable. Got it? Oh, and to help you out with that, here's a tip. There's this really spooky looking guy who wanted me to bring you to him.
No way!
Way! But now I realize that it would be really dumb if my character actually tricked you into stepping in his trap.
Wow, thanks for being a real pal, Shiki.
Well, look, I can dream, alright? The next year we got the World NTWEWY Live remix. Like I outlined in another old video, Shiki is the only playable character from the original game to not be stated to be considered to be playable in this one. Why? But these are all just spin-offs and cameo appearances. Surely if the main story was to ever continue, Shiki would be done justice. Why is there a laugh track playing? A New Day was a bonus chapter added to the switchboard of the first game. Seeing as it takes place after the events of the original game, Shiki's appearance here should be the first time that we really get to see her true self after over a decade. And when we finally meet Shiki in this day, she looks like Eri. Why? Well, most of this day takes place in a fake reality created by this pink gremlin. What motive does she have for reverting Shiki to this form? None really, but she does and we have to deal with it. Also, said pink gremlin is established to be really fuzzy on the World NTWEWY's lore, so she gets a lot of facts wrong in her own reality. As such, Shiki gets a couple of the details of her own story wrong, which Neku calls her out on and corrects her. Neku addressing these inaccuracies when he's speaking with the fake Shiki is good, but not necessarily good enough. On one hand, that does show that they didn't forget her character, but it also acts as a sign that they aren't really interested in taking it anywhere else, and that Shiki is just here because they aren't allowed to not include her. As a part of a New Day's plot, Shiki's partner gets erased by a shark, which we know from earlier in the game will erase Shiki in 7 minutes. And I'm convinced that they made the boss fight against this shark annoyingly long just so that most players would take more than 7 minutes to fry that fish. Most players will know that this death isn't real, but this scene is still played straight like a real death scene, which just makes the fact that Shiki is erased off screen even more jarring. I know that this Shiki isn't real, but she's still symptomatic of Square's treatment of the character. Now, A New Day's writing wasn't very good, and most of the characters come across as inconsequential across the board. That's something that's pretty clear to anyone who's played it. But they all at least have some small reason to be there. Beat and Neku are there to act as surrogates for the player. Coco's there for a plot twist, the fake Hanakoma's there to give the characters a goal, the fake Joshua is there for comic relief, and the fake Rhyme is there to give Beat some sort of character conflict. But the fake Shiki? Nothing. Even the real Shiki doesn't do anything of consequence. She shows up at the end just to clear up a potential continuity error for the next game. Oh, and don't get your hopes up for seeing her eyes, because when I say that she appears, I mean that we hear her voice over the phone. I do want to make it clear that my issue is not that we don't get to see the real Shiki. It would be nice to see her, but that's all just a part of the larger issue. The issue is that the writers can't be bothered to actually integrate this character's character into the story. She's there to check a box on a checklist, and that's it. Still, the issue didn't feel that bad yet. Most of these issues are more glaring in hindsight. At the time, it could easily seem like Shiki wasn't that involved because none of the stories she was in since the first game happened to be about her. Even when the anime dropped and gave Shiki's week the least number of episodes and still refused to show her face, it felt worrying but not necessarily alarming yet. But when we finally get to the second main entry in the World NTWEWY series, the issue becomes unignorable. Shiki Misaki is in Neo the World NTWEWY, but may as well not be. She has two good moments in the game's plot. The first is a scene where she reunites with Neku for the first time after 3 years, and the second is allowing us to see her face for the first time when she shows up to watch the final battle. And I don't want to say that these two moments are bad. They're actually really good, and I love that they're here. I popped the frick off when I saw them for the first time. But these two scenes are the two things that you needed to do when writing a follow-up to the first game. There's nothing new or interesting here. It's as basic as what needs to happen in a follow-up to A New Day. Well, Neku and Shiki should probably reunite, and maybe let's see her eyes this time. They did not come up with anything new or creative. They fulfilled an obligation. And once again, she's the only character given this treatment. Neku, Beat, and Rhyme are all given more characterization in the game's main story. And even though Joshua's screen time is just as lacking as Shiki's, his character gets a greater focus in Neo's post-game content, which actually does build off his storyline from before. I'm not saying that I needed Shiki to like replace Beat as one of the lead characters or something, as cool as that might have been. In fact, I'm more of a fan of Beat than Shiki, so I'm pretty happy with how the main cast was set up. But if they're going to pretend like Shiki is important enough to get a page on the main website, then this just is not enough. I guess while I'm on the topic of Neo, I may as well talk about Gato Nero. As was established before, Shiki has always wanted to become a fashion designer. And 3 years after the events of the first game, she's created a fashion brand that's taken Shibuya by storm, Gato Nero, a brand that's themed around Mr. Mew. On paper, this sounds like a really good thing to add to her character. It creates something that allows us to see that Shiki's life isn't just revolving around Neku, and we can see who she is on her own. And being her own self is a core aspect of her character. But weirdly enough, for how prominent Gato Nero is in Neo, that's not what happens at all. Not only does Shiki's role in the story have astonishingly little to do with this brand, the fact that she is the designer in the first place is contradictory to her arc. While yes, she did want to be a fashion designer in the first game, she wanted to be one because that was what Eri was good at. Shiki was always better at sewing. If this was really Shiki becoming her own self, why does she just become more similar to Eri? Her doing something contradictory to her original arc isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what is a bad thing is that the game doesn't seem to be aware that it's done this in the first place. It's like that part in A New Day where they get parts of Shiki's story wrong, but this time it's like they actually forgot. I swear, Gato Nero exists more in service to Mr. Mew than it does to Shiki. Because even if her role in the company doesn't seem to fit well with her pre-existing arc, it doesn't actually matter. When Shiki does eventually show up in the story, her brand hardly factors into her characterization at all. It makes it clear to me that the brand is only here so that Mr. Mew could still be the series mascot. As for Shiki, instead of Gato Nero being a part of her story in this game, all of her scenes just revolve around Neku, which is really painful to see when Shiki is so much more than just Neku's girlfriend. And I'm not even getting into shipping. Believe me, I am not getting into shipping. But that's all Shiki is in Neo, the girl who loves Neku. Characters like Beat and Joshua also have a lot of their character beats tied to Neku, but they also have scenes that show who they are on their own. But the writers either forgot who Shiki was on her own or didn't care to show her as anyone other than I'm gonna cry now cause Neku happened. One more time for emphasis. This is not bad. The fact that this is all we got is the problem. I guess it would be fair to state that Shiki does have another role to play in the plot that isn't tied to Neku. Similarly to Rhyme, whose real introduction happens in the game's final act, Shiki's main role in the narrative is to help with Operation Awakening, the hero's save-the-day plan. Shiki's role is to salvage this girl Tsukumi's soul from inside Mr. Mew by sewing it up, which is a thing that can happen because the writers wrote it into the script. This isn't perfect, but at least it's something. And not only is it something, but it's something off-screen. Dang, this time it's not even just Shiki's character that's getting done dirty, but Tsukumi's too. Two for the road. But yeah, is the issue clear now? There is no substance with anything related to Shiki, but it doesn't have to be like that. An idea that I was hoping would come to fruition in Neo was that Eri would be the shopkeeper for the Gato Nero store. It would have served as a fun little fake out. Some players would have been all like, oh look, it's Shiki. Wait, no, that's not Shiki. Who the heck are you? And it would have just been so cool to see Eri again, especially after the anime decided to improve her character threefold. Like holy frick, this girl hardcore profited from the anime. There is such a funny thing about them having such a limited runtime and having to gut out so much but choosing to spend more time than the game does on Eri. Like, I can't forgive the Shiki slaughter, but I salute the Eri dedication. But getting back on track to Neo, Shiki would have been fun to have as a side character akin to how someone like Eru was handled. You know, appearing periodically throughout the game for side quests or the like. And if you're worried about potentially causing problems with party members from the original game seeing her too soon, I don't think that would be an issue. You can make sure that she leaves town starting at week 2 so that when Beat and Neku join the party, she doesn't interact with them too early. similarly to what they did with Minamimoto. As for Minamimoto, who's playable during the first week, him seeing her probably wouldn't cause any continuity issues. Odds are he doesn't even recognize her, and even if he did, as if he'd say anything to Rindo and the gang. One last thing about Shiki and Neo, and this is really a nitpick, her outfit. I don't really like it that much. This is probably just a me thing, but I'd imagine that the designer for Gato Nero would have a more stylish outfit. Props to all the fan art of Shiki that gives her a new outfit, because they're practically always better than her canon one, at least in my opinion. And because of that, I've never had any issue with the fact that in most promotional art for anniversaries and stuff, she's always depicted with Aries appearance. The game in which she actually has a full design for her true appearance barely has her in it, so yeah, it just makes sense that she's always portrayed with her most well-known design. Of course, I would be singing a very different tune if Neo had actually used her to a noteworthy extent and maybe gave her a design that I liked a bit more. But until that happens, I actually kinda prefer this. I genuinely think that it would be weirder if her Neo appearance was used when she's grouped alongside a group of characters that all use their primary designs from the original game. That's just me though. Moving forward, I really hope to see Shiki get the justice that she deserves. I'm pretty against the idea of seeing too many returning characters in future games, but Shiki's up there on my list of exceptions. Square needs to right their wrongs here, and you know, it would give them an excuse to keep putting the series mascot Mr. Mew in these games, because here's the thing, darling, you're gonna have a hard time justifying Mr. Mew's prominence while also leaving his owner out in the cold. A good way to start would be making her playable in a Neo Final Remix. I've talked about before how I think Neo is a perfect game to allow for more playable characters to be swapped into your party, and Shiki would be an excellent pick for that. You might have to, you know, write her into Neo's Another Day or something crazy like that, but come on Square, your Shiki allergy can't be that bad, can it? I also imagine that a sizable portion of the rest of the community would also love to see this happen too, since Shiki was the winner of the previous World Ends With You Awards, a character popularity contest held on the flaming remains of what was once called Twitter. Actually, as an aside, I have little care for who wins these since I already got my boy Beat to win the first year, but if we could all collectively make sure that Fret and Hanakoma face off against each other next year, that would be super cool. Anyway, that's about that. Tell me, how do you feel about Shiki? Do you think Square was right to treat her the way that they've been treating her? And if so, explain why you're wrong. What would you do to improve Shiki's portrayal in Neo or future entries? Get to talking in the comments. But before I dip, I want to give out some extra special thanks to first Floral Laurels, the artist for this video's thumbnail. You might recognize their work from this podcast ends with you, and of course, they knocked this thumbnail out of the park too. And second, I'd like to thank Shiyuri, this video's stellar voice of Shiki. She was an absolute joy to work with. Both of their links are in the description, so go check them out. And I can't forget to thank Bacon King, Kaiser, Nero Jacob Kurotama, Willpower 784, Wonderland Snack, and the Missing Samurai, our ever so supportive patrons. Odds are this is probably the last time that I'll see you in 2023, so have a happy holiday season and a great new year. I'll catch up with you later.